My name is Alan Katz, and I'm the president of American Public Square. I want to welcome everyone here. Tonight's program, Common Good, a Model for Community Engagement and Racial Equity, is the fourth and final program American Public Square has presented as part of the KC Common Good initiative. Now, this initiative, in so many ways, has helped us put into motion in our community the ideas and ideals that American Public Square stands for and for which we were created in the first place. And there are seasons and, as we call them, presenting sponsors without whom we wouldn't all be sitting here tonight. And there are Sue Seidler and Louis Nerman, the Hall Family Foundation, Z-Trip, the Abernathy Charitable Trust, the City of Kansas City, and H&R Block Foundation. Now, the sponsors of tonight's program are Peggy and Terry Dunn, the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, the Dunn Family Foundation, and our supporters, Faith Always Wins Foundation, and Sandy and Ed Freed. And our partner tonight is the National Archives, Kansas City. Now, American Public Square is a member-supported organization. And if you're not an APS member, your playbill, that's this, contains the information on how to join, and some will be available following the program tonight to help you if you'd like to join tonight. If you did not register for tonight's event, or you came as someone's guest, you can register now by going to americanpublicsquare.org. By registering, providing us with your email, we're going to allow you to send a link to the survey that will be sent out immediately after this program, and also information on future American Public Square events. Renee Andriani is graphically recording tonight's program. She's over there. For those of you who've been to our previous programs and seen the results, you realize that she's an exceptional artist, and we're very fortunate to have her. In your playbill, you're going to find information about tonight's panelists and also some relevant facts about tonight's topic, as well as a link to more facts and information on the topic. And we're able to provide this because of the generous support of the William T. Kemper Foundation. Inside your playbill, you're going to find a question and fact sheet. That's, oops, sorry about that. Actually a question and fact sheet. When you have a question, or if you think there's a fact that you've heard that is not correct, fill this out, hold it up, and a volunteer will come and get it for you. We have Pastor Cassandra Wainwright is going to be tonight's roving reporter, and she will be the one helping ask the questions. Where are you? Where are you? There, she's right over there. Thank you. And Tom Burns and Chris LeBeau will be our fact checkers for tonight. And you guys, we want to raise your hands. They're there all the time. Thank you very much for being here. We have civility bells in the audience tonight. The bell will ring if the tone of the conversation becomes less than civil. If you have a civility bell, will you ring it now? Okay, very good. Thank you, Bob. We do ask that you not interrupt the flow of the conversation by applauding or by expressing yourself verbally, except at the beginning and the end of our program. If you agree with something that you hear, we encourage you to do this. And if you disagree, we encourage you to do this. But we want the flow of the conversation to be able to continue. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Director of Community Development for American Public Square and the coordinator of the KC Common Good Initiative. I think it's fair to say, for those of us who have had the opportunity to work with her and work on this project, we wouldn't be here without her, Alana Muller.
Well, thank you so much. If you have an open seat next to you, would you just raise your hand? There were some, okay, so for those in the back, if you'd like a seat, there are lots of seats, especially up closer to the front. Please come on in. So I can't tell you how much it means to me to have all of you here tonight. Thank you so very much. As many of you know, the focus of KC Common Good has really been to provide hope and access to opportunity for all members of our Kansas City community. What we've hoped to do, and I think that we've begun this process, is to bring together the organizations, the people who are already doing this important work. We, as we've said from the start, we do not have any new ideas. We were not putting any new ideas forward. What we were hoping to do was to convene the good people and organizations that are already doing this work to help them to gain more heft as a result of the work that they're already doing, to hopefully improve efficiency and to get people working together. What I can tell you is that the vision of one person, Terry Dunn, who came to us just over a year ago with a concern about our city, has turned into an amazing movement. It's led to the convening of hundreds of people, more than a dozen community organizations, countless events and meetings, including these public forums. For how many of you have you come to some of our other KC Common Good events? Many of you, thank you very much. I hope that you've at least taken away a nugget of information or an opportunity that you chose to seize on. Again, one of the other pieces of KC Common Good was really to encourage people to take a leadership position in this community, that not one of us can do this alone, but all of us together can really make a difference. Another thing that I want to mention to you is that we've brought together more than 100 caring citizens to be part of what we've called over the last several months the leadership team. We've brought together more than 20 clergy members to really serve as the Sherpas of this message of nonviolence and providing hope and access to opportunity for all members of the community. There have been dozens of organizations that have given time, in-kind resources, including locations, venues, food, including the one that we're sitting in tonight. The other thing that I want to mention is that there have been several cities that have expressed a very specific interest in the work that we're doing, and so to me what that says is that this really is a region-wide cooperative that we're engaged in. As I said, I'm so deeply proud and honored to have had the opportunity to lead this initiative over the past year, but as you might imagine, there's a lot more work to be done. So over the past 3 events, what we've tried to do is attempted to engage what I call the thin threads. So we've talked about addressing violence. We've talked about the good fight for resources, how community organizations really, unfortunately, have to claw their way to make sure that their missions and their message and their money and their people don't get co-opted by other people's ideas and organizations. We've also tried to address what we've called the criminalization of policy, whereby poor people really are not able to rise above the heft of the fines that they've been assessed for silly ordinance-related violations. So what that does is that it brings us to tonight to really a culminating program. So as I mentioned to him earlier, several months ago, I got a very poignant email from Rabbi Mark Levin. And what he said to me is that there must be a way to convince people, to get people to acknowledge that we are linked together by a shared fate. That irrespective of the neighborhood in which we live, whatever area of town we call home, whether that is east or south or north or west, it really doesn't matter. That as a region, we are linked by a common fate, and we have to acknowledge that. And so as a result of that, that was the impetus for tonight's program. And so with that, it is my distinct honor to introduce tonight's moderator, Rabbi Mark Levin. Mark Levin is the founding rabbi of Congregation Beth Torah, which he led for 26 years. He's an author and has served on numerous community boards. He's a founder and former vice chairman of Mainstream Coalition. And with that, please join me in welcoming Rabbi Mark Levin.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. It's great to have everyone here this evening. It's so wonderful to see you, and I want to comment on why it's so wonderful to see you. The American society has what we call a civic or civil religion, and that civil religion celebrates various holidays, some of which in some folks' minds are religious holidays, but in the American civil calendar, they're secular holidays, and one of them that I believe we are currently in doesn't get very much comment, so I'm just going to say something about my observation, and that is the holiday that occurs from Thanksgiving until Christmas or the New Year. And that particular holiday is the time in the American civil calendar of doing good. We are supposed to be hopeful, happy, tranquil, and be able to look forward to a future. And most of all, we're supposed to be good friends with our neighbors and live in a community in which all of us build the community together. We could be as nasty as we want the rest of the year, but from Thanksgiving until New Year's, okay, we are pretty much out there being kind to everyone. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I am not at all trying to say that that's not a good thing or knock the rest of the year. It seems to me to rise to the occasion for this particular month is a great thing. I think it's wonderful that during this period of time, you all have taken time out of your holiday calendar. Perhaps you were already on the plaza today shopping, but you've taken time out of your holiday calendar to come here and to consider this very important subject. Now, let's go a little bit deeper. This time of year, it seems to be also as often frivolous, right? It has to do with things that may be superficial. Sometimes relationships are superficial, but we all want to be happy, and we want to act as though everything is fine with the world. Everything's not fine with the world. Everything's not fine with our world. But in our hopefulness, in our tranquility, in our sense of our common humanity of this season of the year, we can together build a better society. What a great tribute it would be if all of us together can act in the true spirit of this month and build something beginning tonight on which we could look back and say, now that was a holiday season we could be proud of. So it is in that spirit that I want to welcome our panelists and thank them for being here this evening. We've been looking at what it means to be concerned citizens, what it means to build up our society. Many of our organizations that we've been examining for this past year are dedicated to reducing the murder rate in Kansas City. And beyond the murder rate, you know, every time someone is killed, it's not just that person. It's the people that are loved by that person and who love that person. And beyond that, as was pointed out to me poignantly in one of the sessions, maybe that person was the caretaker for the family or the owner for the family, and so people's economic situation has changed, and their attachments to other are changed, and their neighborhood has changed. And most of us who simply read whatever rag we read are not familiar with the aftermath because it's not brought up sufficiently. Crime often destroys not only individual lives then, but throws an entire family system into chaos. But we're here this evening because it's not just the family system. We are, in fact, the sum of the family systems of our greater community. And so tonight we want to take a look at, begin the idea of what it means to try to do better such that we will no longer in the coming year be tearing ourselves and our community apart. To help us face this challenge with very informed opinions, we have knowledgeable people that I'd like to welcome now. And as we start, I want to say, I'm going to ask everybody to make comments. Those are my last comments for the evening. Everyone to make comments, but please, to all the panelists, if you would also, address yourselves to the comments that others are making. So to my left, we have Terry Dunn, I believe a very well-known member of our community, who is the former president and chief executive officer of J.E. Dunn and J.E. Dunn Construction Group. He's an active in many civic and community organizations, and I'm going to leave it right there. Mrs. Irene Caudillo was appointed president and CEO of El Centro in December of 2013. And El Centro, I hope you all know this, provides family services for Latinos in the greater Kansas City area. Mr. Mike English, executive director of Turn the Page, Kansas City. He's the first executive director of Turn the Page, a backbone organization for Kansas City's third grade reading collective, and I hope to hear a lot more about that this evening. And finally, Reverend Wallace Hartsfield, the second, who has been in the ministry in Kansas City and Atlanta for more than 3 decades. He serves as the senior pastor of Metropolitan Missionary Baptist Church in Kansas City, Missouri, and is the Freddie Young Professor of Hebrew Bible at the Central Baptist Theological Seminary. So welcome to you all, and I'm grateful for your being here. I want to start with a question to Dr. Hartsfield. This past year, Kansas City Common Good has been looking at the issues of violence and violent crimes in Kansas City. Much of the most violent crime on the Missouri side is concentrated on the east side of Kansas City, Missouri, in neighborhoods that are primarily low income and African American. What role do race and poverty play in the crime in these areas? And if we're going to start to address these conditions, what resources need to be made available to the residents of these areas?
Well, I think, first of all, if we think about a correlation between poverty and crime, that's a complex matter. Let me just say that. It's a very complex matter. What we can say is that there is some correlation. Now there's a big debate over exactly what is the correlation there. But what you have is an area that has been created with intention, an area that was intended to be segregated space that essentially separated blacks and whites, but not just blacks and whites, browns. I mean, basically the east side of Truce, segregated space. And I really feel odd about even feeling that we have to answer this question, because I believe it is well known throughout Kansas City how this space was created, especially post-civil rights movement. It was a space that was intended to create a gap that was based upon wealth, a gap that was based upon education. It's a gap that's based upon power. There was an intentional act to make sure that blacks would not have the same rights or the same opportunities as others when there was a mass exodus from the inner city and whites moved into suburban areas that had to ultimately have the assistance of governmental agencies in order to build highways out into other areas. It left a vacuum that ultimately created an opportunity for crime. A lot of crime that we continue to struggle with even today. And that's because of the fact that there were partnerships between real estate groups and governmental agencies that sought to basically concentrate blacks in this particular area, where oftentimes blacks did not have the opportunity nor the access. And I'm not a person that has the facts on this. All I can say is, based upon living on the east side of Atlanta basically my entire life, with the exception of when I was in Atlanta, and there in Atlanta I also stayed in Fulton County, which would have been the inner city, the comparable piece to what we talk about east of Troost. All I can say is that poverty in some way breeds crime. In no way am I suggesting that there should not be individual responsibility, but an environment plays a huge part in that of crime. And it just so happens that you not only have poverty on the east side of Troost, but the impoverished persons, the major group there, are that of blacks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, let's move on. Ms. Caudillo, El Centro works primarily in Kansas City, in Kansas, excuse me, and largely in Wyandotte County, portions of which also have a high crime area and high level of poverty. What do you think about violence and about violent crime there? And what are the origins that perpetuates high crime and poverty in Wyandotte County or in your service area?
So, first of all, let me tell you that El Centro is a 42-year-old organization that grew out of the need for or a growth in the Spanish language population that came into Kansas City, Kansas, back in the late 70s. Since then, we have definitely remained really down the same path of our original purpose. But we're about strengthening families and improving the lives of Latinos and others through educational, social, and economic opportunities. And what we know about Wyandotte County is similar to what has happened in the greater Kansas City or metro area. But what I will tell you is that what we have built around our families and individuals are things like dual language preschool, financial literacy, volunteer income tax, first-time home buyers education, health navigation. And then because of the rhetoric that we see at a federal and state level about defining the population that we have, particularly as criminals, we are about the advocacy piece right now. That's even more important, to change that rhetoric and get folks to understand the dynamics of what our families can bring, what they do bring, what they have brought, and how they built Kansas City, Kansas in particular. So it's a fight. It has been a fight. But what I will tell you in regard to the similar comments that the Reverend made is that we are battling things like redlining right now. What has perpetuated keeping our community segregated are policies that still today prevent families from living in certain areas. Where our crime rates are, based on the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department, what we know between 2006 to 2011 is that the highest crime is in areas of central, northeast, and south central parts of Kansas City, Kansas. Who do you think lived there? Predominantly people of color. Hispanics in the central area, northeast, predominantly African American, though changing demographics there as well. More of Latinos are moving into the northeast area because of housing stock. So what we have developed and what we are trying to build is, one, having our community define themselves against the rhetoric and what is perpetuated upon us. But I think we took a standpoint in 2009. And what I will tell you very quickly is in 2009, the Kansas Health Institute developed a health ranking for the state. Wyandotte County was 105 out of 105. Then Mayor Reardon decided that the important thing to do was to get a blue ribbon panel together to talk about health. Oddly enough, diverse people coming to the table, but what we didn't talk about was violence as a health issue. Fast forward to 2016, 2017, and all the work that Wyandotte County did to make sure that we looked at it as a health issue, health equity. If we do not begin to discuss race, income, and gender as issues that prevent all equities in our community, we're never going to resolve these issues of crime, most definitely. So what El Centro did was begin in 2009 some of their health education and health navigation programs to begin to really do a holistic approach to a family and a community, and we still continue to battle some of the dynamics and the policies that prevent us from moving forward today.
And do you see those as being similar to what Reverend Hartsfield was speaking about?
very similar to Reverend Hartsfield. There's the segregation, the policies that prevented movement. Latinos are still, when it comes to statistics in Wyandotte County, lacking in education. But again, some of the difference that we have is the fear and anxiety that's created around deportation. It's not all of our population that have status issues, but we do have people in the family where that definitely is an issue. So because it's a federal issue, discussed at the state issue, and often dealt with in some cases at a local issue, we have to begin to look at some welcoming and safe policies and recommendations that take into account the fact that our population suffers from all of that as well. And I think one of the things that's important, and begin to start talking about these collaborative efforts, is that had we not been at these tables that the mayor created and Healthy Communities Wyandotte created, we'd still be in this silo trying to fight the fight. But because we have the voices around the table and making strides to make it a collaborative and an issue that's important to all, I think that's the way Wyandotte County is moving forward in their new community health improvement plan, is to say, in respect, if violence is an issue and an issue in our community, then it has to be, then the community has to be a part of resolving that as well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add this tie between healthcare, violence, poverty. A close friend of mine is Cliff Illick, who was a founder of Cerner. And Cerner had the opportunity to do a study, or was hired to do a study, for the state of Alaska on the cost of domestic violence. A family that has one occurrence of domestic violence in Alaska has 10 times greater cost in healthcare versus a normal family. So understanding what we're talking about, understanding some of the unintended costs that are coming forward as a result of issues that need to be addressed, and this tie between various organizations and healthcare becomes extremely important.
And I hope that we will get to the commonalities that unite all of these issues across different backgrounds, racial, ethnic, equity backgrounds, as the discussion continues. So, Mr. Dunn, you've called for the entire community, urban and suburban, rich and poor, black, white, and brown, all religions, to come together to help resolve the problems of violence and violent crime. So why?
Number one.
And why would you do such a thing? Okay. And what does that look like? What programs do you envision being put into place, and by whom?
Well, you didn't give me an hour to respond to a lot of questions, but let me just talk a little bit about the why. Why I saw an immediate need in this community, because crime and other issues are way too high. And then you start looking at it from a 30,000-foot level, and you start seeing trends and moves and et cetera. And if you can develop a vision, and I think the vision is to address and provide hope where there's hopelessness, to address this common good or social justice, to basically encourage a community of 2.2 million people to get engaged and to have a leadership position in this becomes extremely important. The issue, if you look at it, and we're in the home of one of the great entrepreneurs, we were really talking about social entrepreneurism at an extremely high level. And what you notice is we've been fragmented very much as a community. We have a lot of good intention, and there's a lot of great people doing great things. But we haven't really connected ourselves as a community, number one. Number two, anytime you have a vision, the first item in strategy is to have a culture or value system. And one of the ties that came forward very loud and clear is from the Tree of Abraham. We have the major monolithic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, and we have the Muslim faith that also springs from the same tree. And what you find is the common denominators of all of these religions, when it comes to the common good or social justice, are exactly the same. There is the belief of the old Adam, who is selfish, self-centered, committed the original sin of man. This is very common throughout. And then you have a state that is known as selfless, unconditional, non-judgmental love for others, and a love for the Almighty, but a love and caring for others. And somewhere in between, there's a call for action called empathy. And what we were talking about as a community is how do we come together with empathy, which is a call to action, and we're asking everybody to get engaged. And we have so many things, but when you look at our community, we do not network what we're doing very well. We keep it in silos. So one of the areas that we looked at immediately was how do we break down these silos? How do we measure results? And how do we share that with the common good, knowing that I don't have the answers in many of these areas, and I say that with total humility, but we have a number of people that do, and if we can get people coming together and looking at this as a holistic opportunity to address this common good and the need to help people who are in somewhat of a helpless situation, that they have a pathway for success, hope, and opportunity. So that's what came about very quickly as the fundamentals of what we try to put together. And again, this has to be owned by the entire community.
That's terrific. Any
Can
other
I,
comments?
yeah, I'd like to reiterate the fact that as a organization serving both Wyandotte and Johnson County, we are very small. And one of the things that was very important early on is that we have some expertise around serving the Latino community, but we have to get others invested to understand that our success is your success, is everyone's success. So having my voice at the table was important, but even more important is that those that are impacted the most. And if I can, as an organization, we can bring the trust of our organization, but at the tables where the decisions are being made and that their voice is being heard, then I agree totally that I can't, as an organization, we can't do it by ourselves. We need the allies, we need empathy, most definitely, we need understanding. And part of our movement forward in Wyandotte County has always been for me to make sure if I don't have a seat at the table, I find a seat at the table, but I'm bringing the folks that impacted the most, and their voices are being heard along with those that won't come forward. And I think what Mr. Dunn respectfully is saying is that we all have a role. We have a role in a person, whether it be a crime-ridden community or whether it be an individual, that we all have a role to play, because it should, if it doesn't touch you, it definitely affects you and you're not seeing it. Mm-hmm. So I think that was an important part to play. As an organization, we can't do this we can't be in a silo by ourselves.
In our discussions over the past year, there have been a lot of comments by the activists at the table that we've all been in many meetings like this and nothing's come out of it. Fortunately, we have somebody who's been successful at bringing folks together for a common project. So I want to turn to Mike English, to Mr. English. Turn to Page, Kansas City was established to deal with reading proficiency and to increase the number of children reading at a third grade level. There also been intentional strategy to make this an issue for all of Kansas City, not just for individual schools and their students. So, Turn the Page is starting to see results, as we understand it. Reading proficiency by the end of third grade is increasing, and the gap between the city's proficiency rate and that of the state of Missouri is closing. Explain for us the collective impact model, if you will, that Turn the Page uses, and how might that model be a help to our discussion this evening and to the city?
Okay, well, Turn the Page KC was established by Mayor Sly James about 5 years ago, and at the time, only about a third of our third graders were reading proficiently citywide in Kansas City, Missouri, And so I think third grade reading, it's a key, because if you can read by the end of third grade, you're in a much better spot. You're much more likely to graduate from high school, 4 times more likely to graduate from high school than your peers who are not reading proficiently. So it's actually a big predictor of not only high school graduation, but incarceration. And so we felt we had to really rally the community to figure out a way to address third grade reading. But the challenge was, this isn't just a school issue. No matter what schools do, they're not going to get kids reading proficiently if we don't address a lot of other issues as well. And so this problem, like violent crime, is a very challenging problem that no one organization can solve. And so we decided to take a collective approach to this and started working on this issue. And I think about a year in, I realized that what we were doing has a name, and the name is collective impact work. The people who gave it this name wrote an article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. It's not something I read. I'm not going to pretend like I'm reading the Stanford Social Innovation Review, but people started sending this to me and saying, this kind of sounds like what you guys are doing. So we started to put that structure to turn the page, and the structure of this structured collaboration involves a couple of key things that I think are applicable to this issue as well. One of them being a shared agenda and a shared goal for the community, and a shared way to measure it. And so if we're talking about reading by the end of third grade, we put a number on it. So in Kansas City, only 33% of our third graders were reading. We wanted to get that up to 70%. So we had a very clear goal, very clear way to measure it. But I think most importantly, we then had what we call a backbone organization to be responsible and accountable. And so this improvement that we made is, the credit goes to many, many different organizations, but then me personally in our organization, we're holding ourselves accountable to that population level results. And that's a key distinction, I think, for this, is that there are population level goals that we have, and there are program goals. Violent crime, third grade reading, these are population level goals. And so to get this coordinated collaboration going, what we've done is really work across sectors. And so we identify what are all of these obstacles that are keeping kids from reading by the end of third grade. And then we bring together many, many different partners to figure out what those obstacles are and then find ways to overcome them. And then in between all of these meetings, and there are tons and tons of meetings, we have people that are keeping all of these connections going. And then maybe most importantly, we have a way to plug in community volunteers to help, because we could walk out of this room today and everybody could be fired up and ready to volunteer and help with this issue. But if there's nobody to help find a way to get their energy put to good use, it's just going to create frustration. So the two issues are different, but they're intertwined, third grade reading proficiency and violent crime. But I think that the approach that we've taken to third grade reading, we could draw some lessons for violent crime as well.
Well, I'm going to ask what those lessons might be. We've talked about the underlying conditions and the causes of violence and violent crime in our community, our greater community, greater Kansas City community. Need to bring the whole community together on this issue, and a model that you've just offered, Mike, that we might be used to bring everybody together. So the question for all of us, and I would say for those of you sitting here as well, where do we go from here? So what are the starting steps? I heard, if you'll excuse me, a number of silos, different perspectives, given the social situation from which each of you comes, and the historical background of the communities from which you come. But where do we go from here? What steps might we take that would begin for Kansas City to create this idea of a collective impact model? What would the goals be? What would the population be? How are you going to measure it? I don't care which part of that you start with. The question this evening is, can we begin to move in this direction as a cohesive community? Anybody can jump right in. Whoever's got some courage.
I mean, I'll take a little courage and a step to say, you know, the process that we talked about when we talked about health equity in Wyandotte County was making sure that we got the information from those residents that are impacted the most. Because I can, as I said, I can sit around the table all I want to be a voice, but until we get those voices that are impacted the most is important. And what the information in surveys and feedback that we got was the non-traditional kind of health being diabetes, chronic disease, but that the 4 focus areas in our community were around affordable housing, access to medical and dental, was violence prevention, and jobs and education. And so looking from that, or approaching it from that standpoint of listening to the community, the idea is that we have to look through the lens. We also have to have a lens in looking at those constantly along the way, looking at discrimination, looking at gender issues, looking at those, what we call ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And if we can continue to make sure that lens is on all of those focuses, what we're doing right now is we're saying everyone can be, we can take all of the volunteers, and we will take all the volunteers, and we do have the backbone. And what's interesting about this is what was decided was this started as a health department accreditation, a community health assessment that's now become the responsibility of us as organizations to fundraise, to provide resources, to provide people, and to make sure we do have outcomes, we do have strategies, and what we want and what we're doing is engaging not just the professionals, because those are the ones, you're correct, we see the El Centros and Turning Page and to mention a large others in Wyandotte County. But I think the way to start is that we have to make sure that every resident, one, continues to be part of any process, continues to be heard, and that we don't lose sight of those issues that they have brought forth to say, this is the path we take in order. Looking at health in a non-traditional way and getting people from economic development, to the police department, to a variety of different, we have livable neighborhoods, which are neighborhood groups, being a part of affordable housing and violence prevention and access to health. So those things are far greater to be able to help someone on having a more healthier community and getting, dealing with violence prevention than we would if we were to take a look at their chronic issues or their behavior and gender, genetics. So I think we have to make sure that we are continually listening and continuing the process of making sure folks are engaged and involved.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on a macro level. I believe we're looking at process, and we're looking at structure, and we're looking at how we communicate. In one area, we're looking at the religious leaders of our community really to focus within their congregations and reach out on this whole initiative or the value system and culture of common good. Secondly, we need to break down the silos, and to do that, we need to have what I call a communication system and a measurement system. Right now, we are talking to KC SourceLink to really help us put together the backbone. KC SourceLink, which was founded a few years back, has had a tremendous success in entrepreneurism and connecting entrepreneurs in this community and about 100 other communities throughout the United States and now throughout the world. What we'd like to do is connect 2.2 million people to a communication system that is breaking down these silos that we have lived within. It's going to take time. We need to have something that we measure. We have the major foundations in our community, which is a sizable number. We want them to be able to analyze and look at the measurement, whatever the measurement is, and I can assure you, whatever we start out with will not be perfect. We're going to have to evolve and change, and we're going to have to look at best practices. But we would like for them to look at this as invested capital. We'd like to have the business community through the chamber and others, City Council, to look at workforce development. What role can they play on providing that level of hope? And then we have education, healthcare, et cetera. But breaking down the silos, developing a measurement system, and being able to communicate is going to be very, very important to really bring a community of leaders together.
I think something else we have to take into consideration, you know, the collective impact model piece, I believe absolutely is key to addressing what we're talking about. But I think that before we can get to cooperation, we have to deal with the whole matter of being able to just coexist with one another. And when I was saying to you earlier about East of Truth being segregated space, and then the Wyandotte County piece, same thing, it's segregated space. We've had a history of segregating ourselves. And when I speak about coexisting, I'm talking about integrated living, which doesn't always have to mean that everyone is just necessarily living next door to each other, but coexisting with each other is about, yes, having equal and equitable education systems, equal and equitable housing. I mean, all of those things are there, and I don't think that you can really seriously talk about cooperating everyone. I think that we can get corporations and others to come together and cooperate, but ultimately, I would think what leads to community is that you have to first be able to coexist. Once you can prove that you can coexist, then we can talk about cooperating. Cooperating builds the stage for coalitions to be developed, and then once you get that, then we can talk about community being birthed. I mean authentic community, not many communities, not the white community, the black community, the Hispanic community, but communities that are grounded in respect, in the whole matter of reconciliation, and even the whole matter of righteousness. I mean, respect is about saying, if we're going to coexist with one another, I don't have to agree with you, but I value you. And I'm not going to degrade you. I'm not going to put you down and disregard what you bring to the table. And I'm not convinced, I want to be at that table, but I'm not convinced that we have that kind of table. And I'm even wondering whether or not we have the courage to come to that table. It's not only respect, but it's reconciliation. And I have to almost back off that, because to have reconciliation suggests that there was a conciliation. And when you begin to talk about areas like Wyandotte, when you begin to talk about areas like East of Truth and so forth, I'm not really sure I can say that there's been a conciliation process there. And then when I speak about righteousness, I think we have to deliver righteousness from religious talk. And righteousness just has to do with right relationship. Being convinced that I'm going to be in right relationship with you. Otherwise, I don't know how we ever value life enough not to feel like it's just easy just to go out and to do violence to one another. So I'm for the collective impact. I want to get there. I'm just wondering, is there a step before that? Before we can really do that. Otherwise, I'm going to feel like it's just another program being thrown here, and there are a lot of people that are not here that need to be here, a lot of persons that are going to raise very suspicious eyes, no matter how noble and how concerning the proposal that Brother Dunn is bringing before us. I just believe that we have to take serious this whole matter of coexistence. Sorry for being so long.
Oh, and can I just want to echo by saying many times we come to the table and want to talk about equity. And I'll say it again. If we can't have the hard conversations about race, gender, income, those inequalities, then we can't get past, we're not going to be able to move forward. And often is the case in being, I've been around Johnson County tables and Wyandotte County tables and have brought up race to only be shut down. We've resolved that. Things are better. We're over that. And so not to respect and understand that I know we're not there yet, that we haven't gotten over that barrier. We have to have some tough conversations about where people are in order to garner some of that respect that the Reverend was talking about. I totally agree with
I would only add that what we're talking about is something that's generational. When you have racism, when you have disrespect, segregation, all these words. I would say this, I don't know the pathway forward, but I do know we need to move to a level of trust, and that has to be earned. And I think we need to be receptive on how we get from where we are today to where we're going. And I know it's not going to be easy, but I think, Reverend Irene, you are laying out the issue, and we have to figure out the process on how we get from where we are today to where there is a trusting relationship, and that 2.2 million people have an empathy for all, and they look at people who perhaps maybe are down and don't have hope as a client that they can help along the way, that they can have understanding. They will never be able to walk in their shoes necessarily, but they can certainly have empathy and a call to action to develop a level of trust that hasn't been there since I've been around.
I would love for you to look at our community and the community as your neighbor, as the person who sits next to you in the pew, as the person who has children going to school with your children. And when we can begin to kind of visualize and communicate, and I love your concept of communication, because that needs to happen, and we need to begin with some of those pieces about being open and honest and getting over some of these barriers that prevent us from moving forward and garnering the trust that each of us want from each other.
So I have the sense that we've arrived at the primary, at a beginning question. Nonetheless, I'm going to ask for questions from the audience, assuming that there's some over there. How are we doing?
This question is addressed to Mr. Dunn, and it says, for those who say they're tired of talk and rhetoric, what is the plan to move beyond all of the dialogue from each of these forums to develop a shared plan for our communities to address and/or positively impact violence in Kansas City? And as it relates to racial equity, what does this call to action really look like for our communities?
Let me comment by saying again, okay, excuse me too, I'm coming off of a cold, so my voice is not quite as strong, but I would say this. We have about 5,000 organizations that call themselves not-for-profits. Then we have educators, healthcare, et cetera. We have a lot of people engaged in these issues that are much more knowledgeable. All I can add is, again, I believe there is a process. I believe there's a vision. I believe there's a mission. And I believe we have to come together and recognize that we need a common culture and values if we're ever going to get to where we need to go. I don't have a quick answer to the question, but I understand the process on what we need to do to get there. So I'm sure others at the table have better ideas on the right decision to get to address these issues, but candidly, I don't have the answer.
It was addressed, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think that this issue is more complicated too by the fact that we have institutions and organizations approaching it from different perspectives. We have law enforcement initiatives, we have citizen resident initiatives, both aimed at reducing violent crime, but not necessarily always working together. But I like to point out good news when I see it, and one of the recent good news stories I saw was from KCUR, a story about Northeast Kansas City where violent crime has been reduced, and one of the reasons given in that story was that Jackson County Combat has been convening every month at Matty Roads groups of organizations that are working on this issue to better communicate, and it seems to be working. And so the path forward for this issue in particular, I think, really does require getting organizations that are working on this issue to start communicating better together.
We don't even have control of our measurements processes throughout this community. We know, for instance, that suicide is rampant. We don't know what that number is. I've heard it's anywhere from 3 to 5 times the amount of murder in our community in this area of suicide. To be able to come together and start measuring and reacting to big data and measurements is going to be very, very helpful to at least address what we're doing, and maybe we have to do things differently, and listen to other resources to come up with the right solution.
We have another question.
Yes, and this question is for Dr. Hartsfield. You said there was intentionality that led to Kansas City having a socially segregated East Side. That implies a widespread attitude of white supremacy. Where do you see that attitude still active in Kansas City today?
Well, it's still active because we're still in the communities and we're segregated. And there's not, in my estimation, a real intentional move towards doing something any different. We're going to have to make a decision, and I think this is very important in how we're going to work the collective impact. Are we looking for revolution or relief? If we're looking for revolution, that's what it's going to take, in my estimation, if we are going to address not only white supremacy, any kind of supremacy keeps us from not getting to the table. Now, we know historically that white supremacy has seemingly been a big part of helping to create the communities that we have, but responding with other forms of supremacy, in my estimation, is nothing more than continuing to disrespect one another. And I truly believe that the only way that we're going to be able to address the crime where persons begin to value one another, where they don't seek to do harm to one another, is a huge part of that is going to be economics. We've spoken a lot about social pieces, but here's another area where people just shut down. When you come to the table, anytime there's a move towards having to talk about the economics of a situation like this, I mean, you know, God forbid that you bring up the bad word of wealth redistribution. I mean, you know, because that's truly a no-no, but it's interesting, in my estimation, how persons can be so against that and not feel the same way with regards to poverty. because poverty, in my estimation, is just the opposite of certain persons controlling everything. And so I think that we really have to, I mean, personally, I'm more for the revolution piece, but I recognize that the community where I live, there is not, hear me, there is not a night that goes by that I do not hear and deal with sirens that go on for at least 2+ hours in the run of the night. So much to the point that I've learned how to sleep through it. I've learned how to sleep through helicopters flying over all the time. Folks in my neighborhood, many of us just need, I mean, we need some relief. Even if we can't get to the revolution, we need relief from this. But my hope would be is that we seriously talk about revolution, but the only way we can talk about revolution is that we approach one another, as Irene said, as a neighbor.
Can I just add real quick? In Wyandotte County, a couple of years ago, there was a heat report that was put out, and you can find it online. This talked about the redlining from the plaza all the way, you know, around the greater Kansas City area. We still have realtors in our community right now that still use that same language about not to who to sell to and who not to sell to. So we haven't even, people haven't even had the concept of realizing that some of the paperwork, and we have found it and we have seen it, and it still exists today when sold in neighborhoods, statements on the forms that say, do not sell to African Americans, do not sell to. The other big piece that I would say is representation. Wyandotte County is 165,000 people, 41% white, 29% Latino, 23% African American, 5% Asian, and we have a great refugee community from all across the world. We do not see ourselves in positions from the unified government to the school board. School district is 50% Latino. And we have to begin, not me saying, why don't I have someone that looks like me sitting or within these places? Because we've got to work as well. I mean, some of them are elected positions. But we've got to start saying, why is that? Because if you can have me at the table, then you should also be able to have people that look different at those decision-making, in some cases, high-paying jobs, that can give a diversity of thought so that we can move forward. And those are some of the things that we don't see. We don't see, I mean, we're not as diverse as we need, as the community reflects. And we see that. We want everyone to see that and be outraged by that. So and that's what makes a change.
I'm going to jump in here, even though I'm the moderator. I would like to redefine the notion of prejudice. All human beings, according to social scientists, act according to prejudgments. When we look at another human being, we prejudge according to our experience of the qualities that we immediately perceive in that human being, whether it be color or gait, the way a person walks, or height or gender or whatever it happens to be, we prejudge those people. The difference, to my mind, between prejudice, which everyone is, and bigotry is whether we take those prejudgments and we apply them across the board in society. It is high time that we recognize that the prejudices that were put into place, de jure and de facto, in law and in custom, the prejudices that were put into place based upon who a person is by birth, be recognized and dealt with. And as a member of a group, you all recognize the fact I'm Jewish? I thought you might. As a member of a group that was excluded from certain cities, right? In this metro area, in case you all don't know that, right? Jews could live in certain places, but no longer are we. I know that those prejudices can be dealt with and can be ameliorated and can be removed if people will just change the prejudgments that they make and not turn them into bigotries. It requires a change, to my mind. I'll stop with this, that instead of saying you're prejudiced, we recognize that prejudice is a human quality. And the question becomes, how are you going to deal with the prejudices that we all bring into the room and keep them from becoming bigotries?
Thank you.
Unfortunately, the bigotries have become realities in the minds of many people.
Yeah.
So we live off stereotypes. And so that's the reason why, rather than dealing with the east side of Kansas City or east of Troost, rather than thinking about it as a space, segregated space that has so many impoverished factors there, rather than thinking of that space and addressing the issues in the space, what we do is that we locate the criminal activity within the individuals, and therefore you end up starting to talk about blacks, especially black males, as essentially being inherently criminal. That's oftentimes the way it's done, as opposed to dealing with the environment that has been created, where now you have the opportunity for offenders to develop and people to be vulnerable, and you know, all of that is there. You know, it makes for the exploitation of persons, and it doesn't even have to just be black on black crime. It's even from persons who live outside of the community. For example, when I think of like a payday lender and the predatorial activity, they oftentimes come and really prey on persons, for example, that are on the east side. I would dare to say to you that payday lending is almost a banking system on the east side. You know, at one point, I mean, we're doing a little bit better with getting grocery stores and so forth, but convenience stores end up functioning as grocery stores for persons. That's predatory behavior that is rooted in basically exploitation, wanting to do harm to another, and a lot of that is done because of stereotypes that are in place, and we make assumptions about how we're going to treat one another.
I would only add that bigotry has no place in the values and culture. What we're talking about, the organizations that are coming forward will have to make that same commitment and reinforce a zero tolerance on bigotry. And I'd like to pivot just a moment and talk about why I have a degree of hope. I look at what took place just in the last 2 weeks in talking to Molly Agrawald, where KC Scholars, a program put forward by the Kauffman Foundation, where the University of Missouri system has come forward and matched $10 million. Talking to Molly today, I had the opportunity to serve on the foundation board at UMKC. We had a meeting. I asked him about that, and he said, we have over 800 kids that are going to be coming from the zip codes that we're talking about that are going to have $50,000 apiece paid for through KC Scholars over this next decade. He talked about the fact that he awarded 2 scholarships yesterday. 2 young ladies were called to the principal's office where he awarded them those scholarships. Immediately they were in shock, and then they had the commonality of tears because they had tears of joy and happiness and hope for a better future. I would also like to comment a little bit about High Aspirations, which is another organization that is in those zip codes set up for young African-American males. There's approximately 150 young individuals. Most of them do not have a father figure in their family. It costs about $4,000, $4,500 a year. They're being measured by University of Kansas metrics, and they're having outstanding success. And each one of these young African-American males has a pathway to success. And I think when we start thinking like that, and we start sharing good practices or best practices, I think we can do unique things. I know we have a history that we have to get behind, but at the same time, we either move forward or we go into revolution. And I'm not ready to go into revolution. I went through the 1968 riots. I played baseball at Rockhurst. I was playing for Pepsi for a summer league. I had to go over there during the riots. And I've seen the fear. I didn't walk the fear that a lot of people had to walk through, but the riots are not a solution to where I believe this community needs to go.
How do we aid these struggling communities without having a privileged savior complex in the process? And how do we make our efforts feel genuine when these people have suffered for so long?
That comment was privileged savior?
Complex. Privileged savior complex.
That's for everybody?
Yeah, I was going to say everybody. Just as we talked about getting out of the silos, I have to say from a perspective of an organization, we depend upon allies. We depend upon people that have that empathy, that have that trust and appreciation and respect. And I would say well-meaning and truly from the perspective of this is the right thing to do and not about the poor soul or the poor. Kansas City is the most generous city in this world. I mean, you can't deny we have some generous folks in this community. At the same time, what I would say is that it's about the respect. It's about identifying the importance of why it's important that you're doing what you're doing without saying poor, the person. I think that's where how I would approach it.
I would suggest too that persons in impoverished areas don't need to be saved by others. They need equal and equitable opportunities. That is, they need both the opportunity and they need access. At one time, we didn't get opportunity or access. Now, many of us have, and I'm speaking about in impoverished areas, we have opportunity, but we don't have access. I think there's the statement that talks about, if a person comes and asks for something, you can give them a fish and supposedly they'll eat for a day. But if you give them a pole, supposedly they will eat always. Maybe the pole represents they have the opportunity now to possibly eat forever. But it's not until they get access to a fishing hole. Because you can have a pole, and if there's no fish where you are, it doesn't mean anything at all. We don't need to be saved. We need to be given our due. And, when I think about African Americans have had a history of being exploited in this nation. Monies have been taken from us. I mean, simply just taken. And the ongoing exploitation takes money. Basically, if you give us the resources, if you give us not only the same opportunities that others have, if you give us access like everyone else has, I think that what you will see is that you will see social cohesion coming into place. You will see neighborhoods that will then begin to self-determine and be able to do several things. That's the reason why I tend to step back from these programmatic attempts, because a programmatic attempt suggests that, okay, here comes the help, and we're going to come and we're going to put this program in place and make it all right for you.
I would agree.
That doesn't.
Yeah, I would agree with the Reverend. We cannot play the game of victimization. And we really are talking about a paradigm shift where we need to understand what does it mean to have servant leadership, to look at the people in need as our clients, and they need to help define what the solution is. We cannot have a push down, we have to have a flow up to create the right level of success. And if we're going to get to a trust, we need to go through this paradigm shift.
Please honestly speak to the causes of poverty and what are some of the solutions, and what are some things that can be done to stop the pipeline to prison of young African Americans?
Well, I'll start with I guess the one area I know the best, which is education. I think education is one of the most important drivers of economic opportunity. I think that one of the real challenges our schools have are that kids start school not ready to learn. So early childhood education for me is very, very important. But once kids do get to school, I think to some of the Reverend's points, especially young black males start to see themselves as criminals very, very early. And so we had a study done with the health department a couple years ago. It showed if you were an African American male in kindergarten through third grade, you had a 25% chance of being suspended from school. And these are kids that are 6 and 7 years old, and they are regularly getting suspended from school. And what happens then is that they miss out on learning opportunities, obviously, because they're not in school, but then they start to see themselves as a bad kid. And so that's something we have to stop, and I think we are stopping it. Our schools are addressing this issue, and I think that's a really important thing. Because until we do that, kids are not going to have the same educational opportunity, and then they're not going to have the same economic opportunity, which is the tie into poverty.
I would only add that what has become very apparent in my journey and what I've done is the fact that the people or the children who are at the greatest risk require much more resources. And for those, whether it's in education or whatever, that see parity and keeping things equal, we're just doing the same thing over and over again. It's going to create, we need creativity. We need to understand what are the right level of solutions, and we cannot under-resource going forward because these are human lives.
Areas that were once considered blighted or run down are seeing a lot of investment in the River Market, North Kansas City, downtown, Midtown, Crossroads, and the West Side. How do you see that impacting, either good or bad, your organizations or groups?
I would add the East Side to that too, that we see development that is taking place there. I think it could have great potential, do something. My only fear, again, is that, you know, what is the rationale behind the development? You know, historically, and I know that Mr. Dunn has already mentioned this, but for me, historically, we have to overcome some things, and I can tell you I'm one of the leaders that's very suspicious of a lot of outside development that has come into these areas, because what has historically happened oftentimes is that persons who have lived there for years oftentimes end up being displaced because they can't keep up now with the level of development that is taking place. I'm hoping, I know that there are some groups, and I know one group that I've worked with Mr. Dunn on UNI, Urban Neighborhood Initiative. I think is really trying to make an effort to come in and help in the development of the communities and being sensitive to persons who have lived there, and how do we create space that is not impoverished space, but space that provides a sense of hope.
I think the fact of the matter is the tax law change over the last year that created opportunity zones is creating a new focus in areas in the zip codes that have had the challenges. I think the success of the community is going to be in the level of engagement that takes place with community leaders and developers and employers who are coming into the area to make sure there is that sensitivity and that there is a win-win relationship.
What can individuals of privilege do to help ensure that the needs of our disenfranchised neighbors are taken into consideration in regard to development projects?
I think what would help on the east side of Troost is that more people need to own their property. Ownership of property can then be a stepping stone towards the building of wealth. The building of wealth gives persons a stage upon which they can self-determine. And self-determination ultimately gives you the ability to leave a legacy, which now creates the possibility for generations to move forward. Unfortunately, in the areas where I live on the east side and so forth, more than 80% of the people are renters in the areas. So basically we have landlords outside of the community that oftentimes never feel compelled to do anything with the property. Persons are living in substandard conditions and so forth, but it's almost like a monopoly. You can't get a hold of the property like you need to, because there are persons who have deep pockets that can come in and just buy 6, 7, 8 houses at a time. So I think that, you know, if we're really serious about talking about this, persons are going to need to be able to have some control. And to me, one of the biggest things that is about poverty is the lack of self-control. You cannot control your own destiny. Someone else is essentially doing that for you. But when you begin to get land and wealth and so forth, it leads to possibility. That, to me, would be what persons of privilege, I think, need to be pushing for and saying that it is due. This is what is not just a nice thing to do. This is what is right.
Yeah. I want to add a comment by way of summary. There was a time, it seemed to me, maybe it's my age, or maybe I am historically accurate, when folks thought that the role of government was to work for the common good, not for personal enrichment, but for the common good. And it seems to me that we can speak about individual programs and maybe have some individual successes. But part of my answer would be that those who are seated here and the rest of the citizens of the area need to recognize the fact that regardless of my personal outcome, my vote, my activity needs to have an eye on what would be good for society. And it used to mean that someone who had a little bit extra money might pay a little bit more in taxes so that the region would advance, or the schools would advance, or everyone would get a common education. That seems to no longer be the thought pattern of many people, and I would, for myself, I would urge people to consider going back to the model that says that the role of government is the common good of all folks who are citizens of the area. And even if that is to my individual personal detriment a little bit in the short run, it is the common good is the best good for myself in the long run. And I would love to take your question, but we're going to move ahead to the conclusion. But maybe you could come up afterwards. And I feel constrained by time. Do you want to say one thing, sir?
Yes. I don't know will there be an opportunity to take questions from the audience.
Well, those questions were from the audience, sir. Those were from the audience, and I'm sorry if the instructions were not clear, but folks were picking up questions and being asked by an individual. So what and now what? That's where we're at in our discussion. So what? Please summarize your point of view in 2 sentences. I am so pleased that I am not sitting there and I am sitting here. And then now what is to give the audience a recommendation of what you hope audience members will go out and do as a result of being here tonight. And in hearing our conversation, what do you envision as the call to action? And I do want to say, as we're saying this, I tried to start out with this is the season of hope. And I would use the same word, hope that the conclusions that we come to are how we might move in a better direction, taking personal responsibility, but with the hopeful conclusion that we can build a better tomorrow out of today. So what, now what? Take a minute, think about it. All right, you're on.
Let's start back.
I don't care.
2 sentences?
So what?
No.
No minister has ever spoken in 2 sentences. This could be.
I think that's hard for everybody who's not being a minister. The so what is no matter who suffers in our community from violence, you should figure out and understand how it affects you, because it does. So what? That's the, it does affect us all. Now what is, there are so many great things happening in our community. If there's a community that you've ever wondered or wanted to, I grew up actually in Ivanhoe, just in the Ivanhoe neighborhood, West Side, and now live in Wyandotte County. As diverse as each of those can be, it was an experience that has built an opportunity. So find some community or someone, even if it's a neighbor, or to learn more about the people that live by you, eat in the same places you do, have kids, as I said before. There are many opportunities, and if you ever want to come to El Centro, we do taxes for our community. We help first-time home buyers education. We have a preschool you can volunteer in. We would love to introduce you to people that you may not have experiences with.
Sounds like an opportunity for change. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. I don't want to have to go after Dr. Hartsfield, so I'll jump in.
I don't go after the minister.
Oh my God.
Okay, so
I'll go after.
for the so what, I think violent crime reduction is a huge problem that requires a coordinated, collective impact approach from the community. And I think that we must take the lens of racial equity when we are setting up these tables where we're putting people around the table to set the goals and come up with the solutions. There needs to be equitable representation from the communities we're hoping to help. And then my now what, I get more than two sentences. My now what is, it reminds me of what my mom was a church organist, and at church one time they were trying to raise money to buy a new organ, and the priest said, the good news is that we have the money to buy the new organ. The bad news is that it's in your pockets. And it reminds me of this issue because the good news is that we have the people and the expertise and the institutions in our community to solve this problem. The challenge is that we need better communication and we need more leadership, both city and region-wide, but also at neighborhood levels. I think a lot of these problems cannot be solved at an aggregate level. We really need local, coordinated collective impact approaches.
Well, so what? I guess we're at another crossroads. I mean, we've been at these crossroads beforehand, and we're here with another opportunity. And we need to go ahead on and do something about it before we don't get another opportunity. Now what? I think I said it earlier. I think that we do need to be about cooperation that is associated with collective impact, but that begins with coexisting with one another, because if we can't coexist, we can't come to the table as equals. If we get the courage to come to this table, then I think it's very important that discourse goes on. But the discourse has to move towards discernment, that is, in all that we say. At some point, we've got to stop talking and we've got to say, okay, how do we move forward from here? And then ultimately, we have to demonstrate that. And that, to me, is not a one-time thing. That's ongoing. We keep coming back to the table. We keep entering into discourse with one another. We continue to discern what needs to be done. We continue to demonstrate what needs to be done.
I would like to talk about an image, and the image is that great city on the hill. And that great city on the hill could be the greatest city in this country. We are not that today. What we're talking about now is a journey forward. It's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. But I believe if we can unite as a community, and that we have people lead, have people engaged, have people concerned, and have empathy for others, we can become that great city on the hill.
The great theologian, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, said that he who rises from prayer unchanged has not truly prayed. I hope that tonight will be a prayer, that we entered the room individuals who had an idea what life is about, and we leave here changed, working towards a common good and a vision of the role that each one of us might take in a community that works for the great city on the hill, the welfare, the common welfare of us all. Thank you all for coming, and good night. Terrific.